Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into an ancient world. One not of gladiators or emperors, but of something way more human. The Roman public toilet. Imagine yourself strolling through a bustling Roman forum, the air thick with the aroma of fresh bread, leather sandals scraping the stone, and the distant murmur of conversations. Suddenly, you spot it. A long bench with holes, maybe half a dozen people seated side by side. No dividers, just a row of perfectly aligned toilet seats made of stone or wood. You probably won't survive this moment if you think about it too hard, because here, privacy is practically a myth, and the idea of going solo in the restroom is laughable. Yet, the Romans thrived with this setup, turning public toilets into lively social hubs, far from the grim and awkward spaces we imagine today. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious who's joining this ancient bathroom adventure tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Walking up to a Roman public latrine, you first notice its design. Simple, yet surprisingly deliberate. Unlike our modern single-stall bathrooms, these were communal spaces, often lining one or both sides of a narrow room or open-air corridor. The seats themselves were usually carved from stone or fashioned from wood, spaced evenly with circular openings drilled in. There was no attempt to shield the user from their neighbors, and that's not just because the Romans had terrible architectural privacy standards. It was a reflection of their social customs. Think of it as a place where socializing and relieving yourself went hand in hand, a bathroom and a town square wrapped into one. These latrines were typically part of larger bath complexes, the public baths being central to Roman social life. They were more than just places to get clean. They were where deals were made, rumors spread, and friendships forged. And if you've ever imagined Roman toilets as smelly, dank holes in the ground, think again. Many public latrines were surprisingly well maintained, often flushed by continuous streams of water from aqueducts, channeling waste away into the city's sophisticated sewer system. Historians still argue whether the Romans truly understood the link between sanitation and health, or if their advanced engineering was more about convenience and civic pride. What's clear is their commitment to infrastructure. Roads, aqueducts, and yes, toilets, all designed to keep their massive urban populations functioning. Roman toilets also featured a clever drainage system beneath the seats, carrying waste away into the Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's earliest sewage systems. But it wasn't just about engineering. Public latrines were also places of communal ritual. You didn't just come to do your business and dash off. The Romans sat, chatted, sometimes even shared sponges on sticks. We'll get to that notorious cleaning method later. Imagine the gossip, the politics, and the oddest form of social networking happening right there, perched side by side. Oddly, some latrines were even decorated. Archaeologists have found frescoes and graffiti on their walls, some friendly, some rude, some downright hilarious by today's standards. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of bathroom stall scribbles, a blend of poetry, political jabs, and cheeky doodles. One quirky tidbit is that Romans sometimes brought their pets to the latrines. Dogs, for instance, could be found waiting outside or even accompanying their owners. Because when nature calls, companionship apparently matters, especially when you're surrounded by strangers doing the same. But the public latrine experience wasn't without downsides. The lack of privacy could be uncomfortable even for Romans. There's some evidence that wealthier citizens preferred private facilities in their homes, often much more lavish and sealed off. Still, the majority of city dwellers relied on these public spaces. So, when you picture the average Roman citizen, remember this. Their toilet visits were communal, social, and architecturally sophisticated. They embraced something we'd now find invasive or downright strange, turning a universal bodily function into a shared civic experience. It's a sharp contrast to today's individualized bathroom habits, but for Romans, it worked. Or at least, it worked well enough. We're still unraveling exactly how they balanced public comfort with hygiene and social norms. Some historians suggest that the communal toilets helped strengthen community bonds, while others argue it was more a necessity born from limited space and infrastructure constraints. You step away from the communal benches and turn your attention to what might be the most notorious and misunderstood artifact of Roman toilet culture: the sponge on a stick. Yes, that's right. A sea sponge attached to a wooden handle, the ancient equivalent of toilet paper. But before you recoil in horror, let's unpack this quirky tool that's been the subject of countless debates among historians and hygiene experts. The sponge on a stick, known in Latin as the tersorium, was used to clean oneself after using the latrine. Picture it. After finishing your business, you'd grab the sponge, dip it into a channel of running water or a bucket of vinegar water mix, and then, well, you know the rest. The same sponge was shared by multiple users, rinsed between uses in the flowing water beneath the latrine seats or in a dedicated basin. The idea was efficiency and practicality. After all, rolls of soft paper weren't exactly available, and leaves or stones weren't the height of comfort. Historians still argue whether this practice was a clever use of limited resources or a recipe for spreading disease. Some suggest that the vinegar solution might have had antiseptic properties, reducing bacteria, while others point out that reusing the same sponge could easily have facilitated the spread of infections. Either way, it's one of those ancient hygiene practices that makes you grateful for modern plumbing. Now, the tersorium wasn't just a tool, it carried social and symbolic weight. In some Roman writings, using the sponge is depicted with a mix of practical acceptance and mild disgust. It was considered a necessary, if somewhat unpleasant, part of daily life. And since public latrines served everyone from slaves to senators, the shared sponge became a curious leveler. Everyone, no matter their rank, was theoretically touching the same cleaning implement. Archaeological finds of these sponges are rare given their organic composition, but traces and ancient texts confirm their use. A fringe theory even suggests that some wealthier Romans might have had personal sponges to avoid public ones, though evidence remains scant. Meanwhile, others speculate that the sponge could have been replaced with other materials like wool or cloth, depending on availability. Another odd tidbit: the word tersorium itself appears in Roman graffiti and plays, often used for comedic effect, much like we joke about toilet paper shortages today. Apparently, toilet humor is an ancient tradition. This cleaning method invites a wider question. How much did the Romans really understand about cleanliness? While their engineering skills were superb, their medical knowledge about germs and microbes was minimal. So, the shared sponge sits at the intersection of practicality and health risk. An example of where necessity probably trumped comfort or safety. Historians still debate whether Roman public hygiene practices overall improved public health or inadvertently contributed to disease spread. Some suggest that the extensive water systems helped reduce illness, while others highlight that crowded latrines and shared implements might have fostered contagion. Despite its grim reputation, the sponge on a stick offers a fascinating window into daily Roman life. How people dealt with messy realities, balanced communal norms, and made do with what they had. It's a reminder that every culture wrestles with its bodily functions, and that sometimes history's solutions are stranger than fiction. So next time you reach for your toilet paper, spare a thought for the ancient Romans and their shared sponge ritual. Part engineering, part social custom, and definitely a conversation starter. As you settle back onto the cold stone bench of a Roman latrine, you begin to notice something odd. Despite the lack of privacy, people aren't rushing off as soon as they finish their business. Instead, they linger, chatting, exchanging news, and sometimes debating the latest politics or gossip. In fact, Roman public toilets were less about isolation and more like lively social clubs, just with a lot more bodily functions involved. Picture yourself there, shoulder to shoulder with your neighbors, hearing the clatter of sandals on stone, the splash of water, and the hum of low conversation. This was no silent, uncomfortable act, but a chance to connect. Romans took their communal toilet experience seriously, and historians still argue whether this social atmosphere was a deliberate cultural choice or simply a byproduct of limited space in crowded cities. One major reason public toilets served as social hubs was their placement. Often attached to the baths or marketplaces, these facilities were easily accessible and part of daily routines. Visiting the latrine wasn't just about bodily relief. It was about participating in the flow of city life, overhearing the latest news, and even conducting business deals. Some ancient writers mention politicians or merchants using these spaces to network or spread rumors. Privacy was a foreign concept here. The long benches with open holes left little room for secrecy, but somehow, Romans managed to chat without turning the experience into total chaos. The absence of partitions suggests that social bonding outweighed the need for discretion, or perhaps Romans had a different threshold for what counted as private. And yes, the toilet was also a place for humor. Graffiti on latrine walls often featured jokes, insults, and playful poems, showing that Romans had a robust bathroom wit. Some messages mocked fellow citizens, others poked fun at local politicians, and a few were downright scandalous. If you think of modern bathroom graffiti as amusing, Roman latrines were basically the ancient equivalent of Twitter, minus the hashtags. But not everyone loved this communal setup. Wealthier Romans tended to have private latrines in their homes, reflecting both social status and a preference for solitude. The common folk, on the other hand, relied on public facilities and may have tolerated the lack of privacy out of necessity rather than choice. Interestingly, the social nature of latrines is linked to a broader Roman approach to communal life, where sharing spaces was common, whether at baths, markets, or theaters. So, the latrine's social vibe fits this pattern, blending the mundane with the public. There's also a quirky tidbit. Some latrines had seats shaped or positioned to encourage conversation, almost like benches in a cafe. While this may sound bizarre today, it highlights how embedded social interaction was in Roman sanitation culture. Historians still debate whether this communal toilet culture contributed to stronger community bonds, or if it simply reflects practical urban planning in a crowded metropolis. Whatever the answer, the Roman latrine was more than a bathroom. It was a stage for daily social life, laughter, and sometimes even political intrigue. So next time you find yourself alone in a modern restroom, imagine the noise, the chatter, and the collective relief of your ancient Roman neighbors. It's a reminder that even in the most private moments, humans have always found ways to connect, and maybe crack a joke or two. You've been soaking in the sounds and social vibes of the Roman latrine, but now it's time to dive deeper into the Romans' actual hygiene habits. The part where history and science start elbowing each other in debate. Romans are famous for their baths, and those steamy, mosaic-tiled bathhouses were more than just places to scrub. They were integral to health, leisure, and socializing. Yet when it comes to the toilets connected to these baths, things get a bit muddier. Roman hygiene practices were advanced for their time. The public baths, or thermae, featured hot, warm, and cold pools, exercise rooms, and even massage services. These bathing complexes were often linked to public latrines, creating a one-stop spot for cleanliness and comfort, or at least as comfortable as ancient plumbing allowed. The running water that flushed the latrines often came directly from aqueduct-fed systems designed to keep everything flowing smoothly. You might think that meant the Romans were pioneers of sanitation science, and to a degree that's true. However, historians and microbiologists still argue about how effective these practices really were. Without germ theory, the Romans had no concept of bacteria or viruses. So while they emphasized water and cleanliness, their methods were far from foolproof. The shared sponge on a stick, for example, likely spread germs despite efforts to rinse it. And the close quarters of public baths and latrines could have facilitated the spread of infections. There's also evidence that the Romans used various substances for cleaning, like oil and strigils, small curved scrapers used to remove dirt and sweat from skin before bathing. This was their version of exfoliating, but also a way to maintain hygiene without soap, which was uncommon. You can almost imagine the scene. People scraping and rubbing off grime in a ritual that was as much about appearance and social standing as health. Interestingly, Romans had some surprisingly modern ideas. For instance, some medical writers recommended rinsing the mouth after meals and bathing regularly to prevent disease. And public baths were accessible to most classes, underscoring an early public health concept. Cleanliness benefits society. But despite these efforts, latrines were not odor-free or bacteria-free. The Romans lacked the tools to fully understand or combat the invisible threats lurking in their sewage. Another fascinating tidbit is that some elite Romans might have used scented oils or perfumes in latrines to mask smells, because even they recognized the stench was a problem. And while sewer systems moved waste away efficiently, the smell could still linger near public toilets, making them less than pleasant places. Historians still debate how much Roman sanitation reduced disease versus spreading it. Some argue their aqueduct and sewer innovations dramatically improved urban health. Others warn that the close contact and shared facilities likely contributed to outbreaks of illness. So, in this balancing act between hygiene genius and gross practicality, Roman public toilets stand as both marvels and reminders of the limits of ancient medicine. They aimed for cleanliness and social harmony, but without modern science, they were partly flying blind. That said, their efforts laid groundwork for future sanitation systems, showing early awareness that water and waste management matter, a legacy that, despite sponges on sticks, echoes through our bathrooms today. Now, as you settle deeper into this ancient world, it's time to marvel at one of Rome's greatest engineering feats: their plumbing and sewage systems. The public toilets you've been imagining weren't just oddly social spaces. They were part of a massive, complex infrastructure that made one of the largest cities of its time surprisingly livable. Think of it as the ultimate ancient urban sanitation hack. You might have heard about the Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer, a massive drainage system that channeled waste and stormwater away from Rome's bustling streets. It's often hailed as a precursor to modern sewage systems, and you're standing right above it when you visit those latrines. Water constantly flushed the waste from the toilets into this underground marvel, carrying it away to the Tiber River. This continuous flow is a key feature of Roman sanitation, preventing waste buildup and reducing foul odors, well, most of the time. The engineering was impressive. Aqueducts brought fresh water in from distant sources, supplying not only baths and fountains, but also flushing the latrines. The toilets themselves were designed with drainage channels running underneath the bench seats, where water continuously flowed, washing away the mess. Some latrines even had grooves in the stone for sponges on sticks to be rinsed, a practical, if not particularly hygienic detail. Historians still argue over how well these systems worked in practice. While the Cloaca Maxima is undoubtedly a masterpiece, the question remains: did the sheer volume of people in Rome ever overwhelm the sewage capacity? Some evidence points to occasional backflows and floods, especially during heavy rains, leading to unsanitary conditions. Moreover, the Romans were pioneers in pipework. Lead pipes, yes, lead, which we now know is toxic, carried water to homes and public spaces. While it's tempting to blame lead poisoning for Rome's decline, most experts believe the water flow was sufficient to minimize serious health effects. Still, the choice of lead shows that even brilliant engineering had its flaws. Another quirky fact: the Romans used terracotta and stone pipes alongside lead, depending on the region and function. And some houses featured complex plumbing setups, including private toilets connected to the sewer system, a luxury few could afford. What's really fascinating is that the Romans integrated sewage management with urban planning. Roads were built above sewers, baths had plumbing integrated into their design, and public latrines were carefully positioned to connect with water supplies and drainage. Yet, despite these advances, sanitation was far from perfect. Overflowing sewers and open drains sometimes polluted streets, and the Tiber itself was often contaminated by waste discharge. These issues contributed to outbreaks of disease and unpleasant living conditions, especially for the poor. Still, the scale and ambition of Roman plumbing remain impressive. Their systems influenced European cities for centuries, even after the empire's fall, showing that their commitment to managing human waste was more than just a convenience. It was essential to urban life. Historians continue to debate whether Roman engineering was driven more by public health concerns or by practical needs to keep the city functioning and impressive. Either way, the legacy is clear. The Romans understood that toilets and sewers are critical to a city's survival. Standing here, you can't help but admire the ingenuity that went into creating a toilet system that served hundreds, maybe thousands daily, connected to a sewer that still exists in parts of modern Rome. It's a reminder that while the technology may be ancient, the challenges of managing human waste are timeless. As you linger in the warm, humid air near the latrines, your mind drifts to the strange, sometimes downright bizarre beliefs and jokes the Romans had about toilets and bodily functions. It turns out that even in the most civilized empire, the bathroom was a place full of superstition, humor, and taboo. Because, well, people are people, no matter the century. One common superstition revolved around spirits and bad luck. Romans believed that certain gods or spirits could linger in the latrines, making them somewhat haunted places. Some thought that failing to perform certain rituals before entering a public toilet could invite misfortune or illness. This might sound odd today, but when your bathroom smells like a mixture of ancient sewage and vinegar, maybe you'd be a bit superstitious too. There were also strong taboos around which hand to use for cleaning. Your left hand was considered unclean and reserved for hygiene tasks, while the right hand was for eating and greeting others. This association persists in many cultures even now, a tiny, invisible thread connecting us to Roman customs. And humor? Romans loved their bathroom jokes almost as much as their gladiator fights. Graffiti found near latrines is packed with crude jokes, insults, and even riddles related to bodily functions. Some inscriptions play on double meanings, poking fun at the stink of rivals or making light of flatulence. You might say they had a sophisticated potty humor, which you definitely won't find on the polished marble statues in museums. A quirky little-known fact is that some Roman poets and playwrights included toilet humor in their works, sometimes as political satire. These jokes helped poke fun at authority figures by comparing them to something less dignified, like a noisy bowel movement. The idea that public latrines could be a place of rebellion and sarcasm is a fascinating contrast to their functional role. Historians still debate the extent to which these taboos and jokes influenced social behavior. Were they merely lighthearted diversions, or did they help manage the discomfort and embarrassment associated with bodily functions? Either way, humor clearly played a role in normalizing something inherently awkward. You might be surprised to learn that some Romans even believed that certain foods or behaviors affected their toilet experiences. And yes, this included superstitions about how to prevent constipation or diarrhea. Remedies ranged from herbal concoctions to ritual prayers, blending practical medicine with spiritual belief. Of course, some of the beliefs surrounding toilets were less funny and more protective. For example, certain areas near latrines were thought to be dangerous or cursed, keeping unwanted people away. This illustrates that while the latrine was a social space, it was also carefully regulated by cultural rules and fears. So, the next time you're tempted to roll your eyes at bathroom humor, remember the Romans, who saw their toilets as places of superstition, satire, and social regulation. Their attitudes were a mix of practical, poetic, and playful. Much like ours, just with more stone seats and fewer plumbing codes. By now, you're probably getting the full picture of Roman public toilets. Not just as functional spaces, but as fascinating hubs of engineering, social life, hygiene rituals, and yes, even superstition. But what about the people who actually maintained these facilities? The unsung heroes, or maybe villains depending on your perspective, who kept the latrines usable amidst the daily flood of waste. In Rome, public latrines required constant upkeep. You might assume that slaves were the primary caretakers, but the reality is a bit more nuanced. Some latrines were maintained by municipal workers paid to keep the sewers clear and the benches reasonably clean. Others were overseen by wealthy patrons who funded the facilities as public services, a bit like ancient philanthropy. Maintaining the flow of water was crucial, especially because a clogged sewer or blocked channel could quickly turn a latrine into a nightmare of stench and filth. Workers often had to clear debris and repair plumbing, sometimes in dangerous conditions. The sewer tunnels beneath Rome were narrow, dark, and smelly. Definitely not the place for anyone who disliked confined spaces or unpleasant odors. A fringe historical tidbit reveals that some workers in the sewer system earned a surprisingly decent wage for the time, given the risks and unpleasantness of the job. It's a reminder that even in ancient Rome, society needed people willing to do the dirty work, and sometimes they were compensated accordingly. Interestingly, evidence from graffiti and inscriptions shows that maintenance workers occasionally left their own marks, sometimes humorous, sometimes weary, on the walls near latrines. They seemed aware of their essential role and had a unique perspective on urban life beneath the city streets. Historians still debate how organized and efficient these maintenance systems truly were. Some argue that Rome's sanitation network was remarkably well managed for its scale and complexity, while others suggest that problems like sewer backups and overflowing latrines were common, especially in poorer neighborhoods. There's also a curious social dimension. While many patrons of public latrines were common folk, the maintenance crews occupied a liminal social space, necessary but often marginalized. Their role was essential but also stigmatized, reinforcing the complex social hierarchies around sanitation. And speaking of hierarchies, there's evidence that some elite Romans employed personal servants or slaves to handle their private latrines, further distancing themselves from the communal mess. This dual system of public and private toilet maintenance highlights the social inequalities woven into daily hygiene practices. In the end, the story of Roman public toilets is as much about the people who cleaned up after the masses as it is about the users themselves. Without these tireless caretakers, the impressive engineering and social rituals you've imagined would have collapsed into chaos and disease. So, as you imagine the steady drip of water beneath the stone seats, spare a thought for those behind-the-scenes workers, whose labor made public sanitation possible. An ancient reminder that even the most glamorous empires rely on the least glamorous jobs.